It is Monday, September 11th at 8:31 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. The Performance Committee will now come to order. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you for joining us. Please note that the committee meetings and the RTD Board of Directors meetings have been continued to be held remotely via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes, will be posted as soon as practicable to our board's website. And also a live stream of this meeting is available via RTD's YouTube page. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you'd like to be acknowledged during the proceedings this morning, I would ask you to raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can raise their virtual hands, as we've been doing, by pressing *9, and you can toggle your mute settings by pressing *6. I will go ahead and call for the roll of the committee members. Director Busick. Director Busick let me know he would not be able to attend this morning. Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Geisinger.
Here.
Here. Director Guzman.
I am here.
Director Sloan.
Here.
And I am here. So we have 5 of our 6 committee members present for the sake of the record. We'll now go ahead and open up the public comment section for anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topics listed on this published meeting agenda, as well as the immediately preceding month's agenda. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, you may raise your virtual hand. I will go ahead and ask our board staff, do we have anybody in the queue or anybody who has submitted an email comment?
Hi, Director Davidson. There were no emails and there are no attendees or hands raised.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ms. Parrish. Much appreciated. With that, we will go ahead and move into our recommended action section. Our first recommended action is the General Manager and Chief Executive Officer compensation philosophy. This is for the Board of Directors to approve the General Manager and CEO compensation philosophy. Before opening for discussion, I would first like to see, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Movement Director Sloan, the second Director Geisinger. Thank you very much. So with this, I'd actually like to open the floor just very briefly and comment, thank you everybody for submitting comments, for all the discussion over the past few months on this compensation philosophy. A huge thank you to Chief People Officer, Ms. Pelleggi, for helping us move this forward. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for your input. And certainly thank you to Mr. Kroll for helping us pull a lot of this together and summarizing. I think we've made great progress on putting together a compensation philosophy. Just as a reminder, I think it took us all some time to find the previous compensation philosophy, which was, I think, maybe 13 years old. We don't need to let this one go for 13 years. It is meant to live and be updated and align with the current state of the agency. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think there is an opportunity for us to move this forward, bring this to the board, and use this as our North Star to set all of our future compensation discussions. I'd particularly like to highlight that this is going to be the lens through which we can view the Gallagher report. So we completed the compensation analysis with Gallagher last year, something this agency needed to do to look at how our general manager and CEO is compensated and how that compares to market. But we did not have a philosophy that was passed as a policy at the policy level of this board to guide our view of that analysis. So I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the general manager and CEO for her immense patience in waiting for us to fully react to the compensation analysis. I think this is a very important step for us to pass that, use this as a lens to guide that, and then of course to discuss our evaluation process in the years to come. With that, I'd like to open the floor now to our Chief People Officer, Charlene Pelleggi, for any comments she might want to make about this compensation philosophy and where we've arrived, as well as then if Mr. Kroll, you have anything to add, given that you have played a substantial role in listening to all board members, gathering feedback, and synthesizing them. So first of all, Ms. Pileggi, the floor is yours, and thanks once again for all the work, hearing all of our priorities and then capturing it and drafting it into something that I think is very strong.
Thanks, Chair Davidson. So I'll keep this really short and sweet because you guys have heard from me a few times now at these meetings. I think the key thing that I want to highlight is that a compensation philosophy is a philosophy. It's a guidepost. It is a living document, as has been communicated already by the chair. It is a document that is foundational, that supports the Gallagher report or any other report that the board wishes to engage in. And it is a guiding document for a contract, but it is not the GM and CEO's contract. I also want to just highlight, there's a couple of key things there. This philosophy is for the GM and CEO. It is only for this position. It is also, as written, as per the discussions of this committee and feedback, it is market. The intention is to be market aligned. But I also want to highlight that we also heard and put in reference to it needs to address and respect the agency's fiscal reality. So even if the market said we needed to pay X, if the agency's fiscal reality can't pay X, that clause allows for that adjustment. And so that was to keep the check and balance that was, as I heard, critically important to the committee. So I just wanted to highlight those pieces. And I think I'll defer to Mr. Kroll if he has any other input to add. But again, it is a guiding document, foundational in its purpose with principles, but it is not a GM and CEO contract. It does not replace any Gallagher report or any other report. It's just foundational to help guide some decisions.
The only thing I would add, thank you, Charlene, for that. The only things I would add is, we received some feedback in advance, and I've shared that with Director Davidson and CPO Pileggi, and I know that we're going to discuss some of that feedback momentarily in a discussion led by Director Davidson. We did have one change from the previous time we met, which was Director Guzman had suggested adding in the mission statement to this document, and we've done that, and that's reflected in the red line version on page 7 of your packet. The only other thing I would add here is, like all policies that come through the board, Director Davidson made allusion to this earlier, that he hopes we don't put this on the shelf for another decade plus before revisiting. As soon as the board, assuming the board passes this at the September meeting, we will set this on a standard 3-year review cycle. The board can always come back to it before then. In 3 years' time, there may not be any changes that need to be made to this, but the board office, in endeavoring to keep everything more constant, is going to take that approach with things like bylaws and policies that the board approves, just so that we're not letting things get too dusty before we take another look at them.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Pileggi. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I think well summarized, and certainly love the idea of revisiting this on a frequent basis. It is a dynamic market. So with that, we're going to open up the floor for some discussion. I would like to note that I believe there are going to be some suggestions for adjustment. What I'd like to do is discuss those, see if we're aligned around where we go. And then let's get organized and make sure we're all on the same page and aligned. And then if there are any amendments that we want to make, let's do them one at a time, not get them embedded. And let's seek some alignment in the discussion before we go into that, so we can just kind of keep things neat and tidy, and I'll do my best to help us in that process. So with that, Committee Vice Chair Sloan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I thought I'd pop in there really first because mine is so small. It only involves 3 letters, and it comes at the very beginning of the compensation policy. And that is in the second paragraph. it said that the overarching goal of the board of directors concerns attracting and keeping a great GM CEO like the one we have now. And I believe it's certainly an important goal of the board of directors, but I don't think it's the sole overarching goal. So I would just suggest changing the word "the" to "an." That is my point. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vice Chair Sloan, for that. Let's just briefly is there any discussion around that? Any concern around that? Okay, great. Let's consider that one for an amendment then. Let's tackle those. Let's go through the whole thing here and see how aligned we are on amending the language. So let's continue the discussion. Thank you, Vice Chair Sloan. I think that's a good addition and one we can certainly make here once we complete the discussion. Other items from any other directors? And I should note, I'll open the floor to committee members as well as other directors. And I do note, for the sake of the record, the Director Arusha has joined us this morning. Thank you for joining the committee. I did see some comments from Director Arusha in email. Thank you. Go ahead, Director Arusha, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure if other directors who were on the committee wanted to speak first, so I was being cautious. Yeah, briefly, I had two suggestions I wanted to offer. The first was just that the committee consider removing the reference to reviewing compensation annually, simply because generally speaking, our GM CEO contracts are multi-year contracts, and performance, COLA, and adjustments are built in annually. Related to that, there's also a reference to, potentially starting our negotiations for another contract 18 months in advance, but we don't always know what the terms of our contracts will be. And so when looking at that, I just felt those two things together would put us in like a perpetual negotiation period. And while some of those provisions might be appropriate on a case-by-case basis, I'm not sure it would be appropriate for a general compensation philosophy. So that was my feedback. Thank you for letting me speak, and also thank you to the committee for your hard work. I've been observing, and I just really appreciate all the work everyone's put in.
Thank you, Director Arusha. Thank you for the comments there. I think we'll open up the floor for any reactions to those particular items, the two being the 18 months prior to expiration of the contract's term discussion with the CEO and general manager, as well as the annual compensation evaluation annually. Before opening the floor to directors, I'd like to open the floor to Ms. Pelegi, if you wouldn't mind. I know we had some discussion around some best practices in this compensation philosophy, in addition to the intent of the committee. So with you being the subject matter expert, I know these were some areas you had weighed in, and wondering if you could do so again now here.
Sure, thank you. So first off, with respect to, thanks for the suggestions, Director Arusha. I'll take them in order. So the first one being having I think you said the compensation reviewed. The compensation, I understand that there's some link here with respect to reviewing the compensation philosophy annually. The key thing here is not, again, it's not the contract. It's not a GM and CEO contract. It is the philosophy. So the intention would be that the board would keep an eye on an annual basis on the philosophy. So do you still want to be market competitive? Do you still want to be targeting private and public sector? Do you still want to consider your fiscal restraints? That's what the review annually would be. It's solely of the compensation philosophy, not of the contract, and not the GM and CEO's compensation. That review is not intended to suggest that you would be reviewing and then potentially making changes to the GM and CEO contract. That would in fact be directly managed through the contract. So the intention is to just keep reviewing the compensation philosophy. Does it still align? And does the board still feel that these principles fit the need of the agency? So that's one. With respect to the 18 months is not, it is not intended in the philosophy to indicate that you would start negotiations with a GM and CEO 18 months prior. What it's intended to be is that the board would signal to a sitting GM and CEO that they intend to, they would like to see that GM and CEO be renewed. And then there would be a process that goes along. The reason for the 18 months is if the board's intention was not to have a sitting GM and CEO continue into a second 5-year or 3-year, whatever contractual term the board wished to engage, they would be giving that GM and CEO effectively notice, and then the process would be, the board would be able to start the process to find a replacement GM and CEO. And that often takes at a position of this type of position can take 12 months. So the idea would be the board would be able to move and potentially have a new GM and CEO in place before the expiry or at the expiry of the sitting GM and CEO. So it is not to mean to engage in negotiations from a contract perspective. Those could happen, but they don't need to happen at 18 months. And it could also be that the board is simply notifying that GM and CEO that they do not wish to enter into a second term.
Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi, for weighing in on that and providing that feedback. I see Director Rusch's hands up for some clarity. Well, let's do some discussion on this. I just want to make sure, let's focus on the discussion on these two items raised by Director Ruscha here, being the annual basis review of market competitiveness and compliance, and the other issue being the 18 months communication. So I'm going to go in order of the hands I see, but let's focus on that part of the discussion, and we'll move on to something else after that. Board Chair Geisinger, please go ahead.
Actually, you just answered my question, which was I wanted to be sure. We're looking at the final bullet that says reviewed for market competitiveness and legislative regulatory compliance on an annual basis. That's the issue that is we're talking about, right?
Correct. That's my understanding. And just to be explicitly clear, Director Ruscha, your hand's up next. So I'll open the floor to you, but could you confirm that we are in fact talking about the final bullet that says be reviewed for market competitiveness and legislative/regulatory compliance, local, state, and federal on an annual basis?
Yes, sir. That was the bullet that I had flagged for consideration. And I wasn't sure if I could maybe clarify or respond to Ms. Pelleggi.
Yeah, please go ahead.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I thank you. I apologize, I'm speaking directly. Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi, for your clarification. I understood what you were saying as you were explaining. For me personally, I think I'm just reading. I'm still reading this differently than what was described. So I guess I would just suggest then, perhaps the committee could just be more clear on that last bullet. And I guess my clarifying question would be, when we say review for market competitiveness, I know part of the work this committee is doing will be to suggest a compensation range for the job. Would that be part of the the compensation review for market competitiveness? Because as I read it, it looks like we would be reviewing a specific contract every year for market competitiveness, similar to what we did with the Gallagher study. And then I also just wanted to completely recognize that it is both common practice and common courtesy to have discussions about renewing a contract far in advance of the expiration of that contract. What really jumped out at me was that this was very prescriptive. It's very specific. It says no later than 18 months. And I know that traditionally RTD has had 5-year contracts, but we don't know in the future if we will have 5-year contracts. So if it would still be standard to say 18 months, then I would respect that and I understand that. But if it depends on the length of the contract, I'm not sure if that language, might need a second look. But anyway, those were my thoughts and feedback. And again, I just appreciate the committee taking the time to hear them and for Ms. Pileggi's time and her explanation of the context.
Director.
Thank you, Director Rucha. Yeah, please go ahead, Ms. Pileggi.
Sorry. So let me be pointed in clarity. So the compensation philosophy says that it will be aligned to market. So if you're reviewing it for market competitiveness, they go hand in hand. So you are checking to make sure that you're still within the market. But at the same time, if there was something that changed, if you're reviewing it annually, the board always has the ability to change the compensation philosophy if it deems appropriate for the agency. So that they kind of go hand in hand. What they don't go hand in hand with is changing the compensation annually. So one could set a market range, but not change the compensation for a GM and CEO. One can set the pay range and not change the compensation for the GM and CEO. That's why I want to just be clear. The contract's very different than the philosophy. The philosophy is just your guiding principle as a board that's going to help inform how you build out the contract and you ensure that you are competitively compensating your GM and CEO within the confines or constrictions of the agency. So fiscal, what's happening in the agency. So yes, it does say market competitiveness, but that's always based on where the compensation philosophy wishes to be within the market. If you were wanting to be top of market, which this compensation philosophy is not, then you would always want to check to see. Why is that important? Because if you were to be falling, if you signed a 5-year contract, you did it in year 1, come year 3 or year 4, if you don't look at it annually, it doesn't mean you make the changes to a contract. But if you don't look at it annually, you may not know what risk you may have of losing an existing GM and CEO, or how the market has changed with respect to if you have to recruit a new GM and CEO. So it's really just to look at it, and you should be checking, does the philosophy still make sense? Yes or no? Is it still market competitive based on where we would like to be? Yes or no? The compensation philosophy. What you do with the contract is separate, and I do want to stress it doesn't automatically mean you have to make a change, because there are other pieces in here, i.e. fiscal constraints and specific language within an existing contract, whatever that might be. With respect to the 18 months, certainly, obviously, I think that makes perfect sense. If you only had a 2-year contract and you had 18 months that you had to give notice, the key thing is it's still going to take you roughly 12 months to find another GM and CEO. So the intention of the 18 months was to put the expectation on the board to make sure that if they wanted to continue with the sitting GM and CEO, that they should be thinking about that and having that discussion. Additionally, for a sitting GM and CEO, and I certainly would not speak for GM Johnson here, I'm just speaking from a general looking, if you're at a level of the GM, it does take roughly 12 months. You don't start looking for another opportunity 12 months out. You start looking 24 to 18 months out. And so it's important, if a board wishes to it's the intention to seek another term, or what the right language is, of a GM and CEO, to signal that to that GM and CEO so as to have the best opportunity to retain, so they may not be out entertaining other opportunities unbeknownst to the board. So that's really, it's just, you're right, it is a practice. It is common practice, putting 18 months in there, and that was a discussion I think that was had. That was the suggestion. It's up for the committee if they feel that 18 months is too prescribed, but that would be the rationale that I would provide for that.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi, and thank you, Director Arusha, for the comments on this and clarifying this. I think this has been a helpful discussion on clarity. Let's continue the discussion on these two items. I do want to be mindful of time. We'll need to discuss the discussion item as well. Just with that in mind, I'd like to call on General Manager and CEO Johnson, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to clarify a statement was made. I believe Director Arusha said that it was her understanding that a compensation range would be adopted. I wanted to be clear that a salary range, from my understanding, is not a compensation range, because compensation includes more than just a salary. So I wanted to ensure that we were using the appropriate terms to limit any further confusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for the clarity. And yes, that's right. We need to adopt a base salary range for the position based on our compensation analysis and using this compensation philosophy as a lens. And then this compensation philosophy will also guide total compensation. So thank you for the clarification there. Director Catlin, please.
Thank you. Ms. Pelleggi, thank you for your clarification. And I'm satisfied with your explanation and think that the bullet should stand. With respect to the 18-month lead time, I totally agree that it takes time, and having with Chair Geisinger and I having chaired and co-chaired or vice chaired the search committee last time, it takes a long time if we are put in that position. So I think having those discussions 18 months in advance is certainly good practice and good planning. So I'm satisfied with your explanation, Ms. Pelleggi, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Catlin. Director Geisinger.
Yeah, I just want to be sure, as I understood what Ms. Pelleggi, what you were saying, that last bullet, be reviewed for market competitiveness and compliance, refers to the compensation philosophy. The sentence really is total compensation will be designed to be reviewed for market competitiveness and legislative regulatory compliance. So are we talking about reviewing the existing compensation, or are we talking about reviewing the compensation philosophy? Because it sounds like it's the compensation.
Yeah, thank you, Director Geisinger. Ms. Pelleggi, please go ahead.
Sorry. So there's two things here. So first off, it is the compensation. But the contract, you could address this if you put it into a contract, frankly. The key thing is you have to be legislatively and regulatory compliant. We all know that. So it's really to make sure that it's a signal that says we are always going to do that. Again, this is the philosophy. So it's the intent of action. So it's saying we're always going to be reviewing to ensure that we're legislatively and market compliant. We're not going to set a philosophy that says we're going to be at 50 percentile P50 and then ignore it for the rest of the time. It's signaling your intentions. So it's showing, again, transparency. We're going to be transparent. We're going to continue to make sure we're market competitive. But again, why I'm separating it from compensation, I understand the connection, how it reads that it automatically means the compensation. Because in a sense it does. If it's legislative and regulatory, you have to make that change regardless of what your contract may or may not say. But the market competitiveness, you wouldn't necessarily have to make the change because you have other components in your compensation philosophy, i.e. fiscal. And I keep honing on that one because it's an important one, given the makeup of the agency, that may preclude you from doing it. But the incumbent, the board, taxpayers, everyone who, when I say transparent, everyone has an opportunity, should know that what is the compensation philosophy? What is the intention of the philosophy? So that's really signaling intention, that you are intending to, you will review so that you're not selling something in year 1 by year 5. Who cares if we're out of market? We don't care. It's not of interest to us. We did it in year 1. We got the candidate we wanted, and then we're not bothered with it. it's signaling that we're intending to stay market competitive, but the other principles still also apply. It's not one more than the other. So I hope that helps, Chair Geisinger. It's not about changing the compensation. It's about the intention that you will make sure you're legislatively compliant, and you will ensure, the intention is to ensure that you are market competitive, unless of course you can't be because of some other reason.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Pelleggi, and Chair Geisinger, if I may, and Ms. Pelleggi, please correct me if I'm wrong in this. I think it might be helpful to put forward the example of Gallagher, for example. I think by putting a bullet like this in our compensation philosophy, we give ourselves the mechanism to react to information suggesting that we are no longer market competitive, or we are market competitive, or the market has shifted. And so if the intent, regardless of what's in the contract, if the intent is for the compensation philosophy to have an eye towards market competitiveness, this gives us the mechanism to react to that information. And then when we do our annual in the current contract, which may be different in the future with this general manager and CEO, if we were to extend the contract, or with a new general manager and CEO, but in the current contract, as it stands right now, we have this annual process for looking at an adjusted compensation. When we do that, if we had information with respect to market competitiveness, we would react to that, is what this compensation philosophy is allowing us to do. So I think maybe just thank you, Ms. Pelleggi, for highlighting this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Gallagher example provides a good one, that this gives us now the board is saying we will react to that new information according to whatever the contract we have in place with our general manager and CEO, which in this case is on that annual review basis. Is that a fair tie-in, Ms. Pelleggi?
Yes. I do want to stress the caveat, though,
that it's
in condition with the other principles that are within the philosophy. So it's not an automatic. It's not that you review, oh, it says that you're not market competitive anymore, so that automatically equates then into an increase or a change in your yet to be set, but a salary band. Like, that's not the intention of it. Because you have those other principles, it has to be looked at it from a holistic perspective. It's just getting the information, that you will have the information, and to your point, then be able to react accordingly.
Great. Just to follow up, if I may, that's super helpful. I mean, I think we should look at market competitiveness. I do think that should not be the only guide if we, our fiscal realities and the other pieces there. So I appreciate the explanation. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Geisinger. Vice Chair, Committee Vice Chair Sloan, please.
Right. I don't want to beat this to death, but I really appreciate the distinction between the overarching compensation and salary range. And I think it is a good thing to have in our compensation philosophy that we recognize that we do have duties under the law to change it as we go along. And I think that can only help to have that in the compensation philosophy.
Thank you, Director Sloan. Not seeing other hands on this item, and then I'll open up for any further discussion. I'll just weigh in with my thoughts on this, since we're gauging what will amend and not amend. I personally am very comfortable myself with keeping that final bullet. Director Ruscia, thank you for bringing this up. I think that actually helped us arrive at some increased and better clarity. And Ms. Pelleggi, thank you for providing that clarity. So for what it's worth, if we decide to move forward with some type of amendment, I'm supportive of keeping the bullet as is. I also wanted to touch on the 18 months. I think that's really quite critical that we do that. I think if we do draw up a new contract with a CEO and general manager in the future, the board should consider adjusting the timeline for the in the compensation philosophy. We can and should revisit this. Additionally, if market dynamics change in terms of the timelines, we would react. I certainly think it's reasonable to expect that we would have we're going to need time, as Ms. Pileggi had highlighted, at least 12 months if we were to attempt to engage with a new CEO and general manager. I would like to open the floor very briefly on the 18-month issue specifically to Ms. Johnson. If you have any thoughts to weigh in on how you think about that timeline, both yourself and your peers in the transit agency in terms of when people are looking for jobs, as Ms. Pileggi had touched on, given that you're the expert on being a CEO and general manager of a transit agency. So if you wouldn't mind weighing in on that, I'd love to hear your input.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to offer my opinion regarding the subject matter. I'll start my comments by saying with the most recent recruitment efforts by this agency, if my memory serves me correctly, the individual that occupied this position left the organization in December of 2019. Recognizing that, I believe the endeavor to find a replacement for said position started in and around the spring of the following year, because I remember specifically when I submitted my materials and when I was contacted by the recruiter, recognizing there was a push from this board to get somebody in place. I couldn't reasonably leave my position, recognizing the roles and responsibilities in which I have. So anybody transitioning that is in a executive level position would more than likely give their current employer at least 3 months notice. So with that as a backdrop, just recently having my kitchen cabinet, an individual was just renewed. It is commonplace because when you look at it, things broad brushly, you do need to have an opportunity, because in a position such as this, one wouldn't wait until 4 years and 10 months to say, oh, I need to look for a new job. That's just not feasible. So going forward, it is common practice with any, I would qualify it as an executive level position where someone would know what was happening going forward well in advance. 18 months is optimal because with any recruitment efforts, it can take close to a year in and of itself just to have something teed up, especially if an agency, most agencies in my experience, will use an executive recruiter. And just to get that process into place can take an agency several months in which to do that. And then you're talking about the time to meet with policy bodies, formulate an optimal candidate profile, whether you're using behavioral or cognitive assessments or outreach efforts within a community. That is going to take some time in and of itself. So I will leave my comments there, that anything less than that, you'll find yourself in a precarious position with trying to identify a leader of your organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Appreciate the input on that. I think timelines are make good guideposts for us. Director Catlin, further comments on these items? I believe you're on mute.
Whoops. So I completely agree with Ms. Johnson, and having gone through that previously, I think it makes a lot of sense to have that lead time.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Director Catlin. And Mr. Kroll, please.
Yeah, Director Davidson, I have a comment on a different topic, but it's contained within this compensation philosophy. There had been some conversations around the phrase, this is in the second paragraph, the board further acknowledges that competition to attract a GM and CEO with the required suite of competencies, knowledge, and experience is extremely challenging given the highly specialized transit environment and tight labor market. I think I saw some conversation there around potentially removing reference to a tight labor market, since those might not always be the prevailing conditions. So I just wanted to raise that for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I'd like to go ahead and first just make sure we're closing out the discussion on, so what I'd like to do, we'll finish discussion on each item, then we'll go through amendments as necessary or as people would like based on the nature of the discussion. So just to make sure before we move on to that, and thank you for raising that, I believe Director Arusha, you had some helpful thoughts about that as well. So just quickly before raising that, any additional comments on the final bullet of the principles and the 18 months timeline? Okay, not seeing any further discussion on that. Let's go ahead and discuss that item Mr. Kroll had brought up. And again, Director Ruscia, thank you for, I know there was some consideration around how market dynamics might be changing. And Mr. Kroll, thank you for raising that. Let's go ahead and discuss that item. So this is feedback from the board here that perhaps a tight labor market may be a temporary market dynamic and maybe one that we wouldn't have in the compensation philosophy. So Ms. Johnson, I saw your hand go up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very kindly, Mr. Chair. I would just add further clarification to that statement, recognizing when you talk about a tight labor market, especially for one running a public transit agency, the pool isn't vastly wide. And so perhaps there could be some wording that further addresses that as you go forward, because looking for a specialized position in which the one I hold or looking for talent for that specialized position can be tight. And so I think when we talk about a labor market, it's more reflective of the talent that's available for this specific position, recognizing one needs to be well-versed, in my humble opinion, with transit service delivery aspects of, government relations. It's a myriad of different things, not just being able to understand how to put a bus or a train on the street. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate that. Ms. Pelleggi, please.
Sure, I just want to just address this one specifically. So I'll come to what you had just commented on, GM Johnson, but I would say the second last bullet says adapt nimbly to changing external. So for example, labor market and internal circumstances, fiscal restraints. That in itself could capture the tight labor market reference. Like, I mean, you would be it says you have to be able to adapt. But to what GM Johnson was just saying, the sentence says required suite of competencies, knowledge, and experience is extremely challenging given the highly specialized transit environment. Maybe it would be transit environment and this position, like something that kind of fleshes out a little bit more that the position of GM and CEO is a highly specialized and complex position. I mean, I know we're kind of catching it, but there could be a small edit there. But I would say, I think the reference to a tight labor market is very specific, and were the committee, should the committee decide to remove that, you would still be capturing in the second last bullet the labor market. I mean, it's the compensation philosophy is always telling you need to be considering the labor market or any other external variable that would be relevant. So you could, but I do think the tight labor market from the discussions was more, as GM Johnson was describing it, more about the position of GM and CEO and less about our current circumstances as a whole across the country, frankly, when it comes to labor and being a tight labor market. So if that helps, I think you can capture, but the labor market as a whole, but potentially some wordsmithing to capture the intent was more about the highly specialized nature of the position. So it's the position and the transit environment.
Great, thank you, Ms. Pelleggi, and thank you, Ms. Johnson. I have one or two thoughts on that, but first, anybody else have any other comments or discussion on the tight labor market reference? Chair Geisinger, please.
Just that I appreciate both of their comments, and I think we could be more artful in how we say it, and just referring to this position. I think that's good. The highly specialized transit environment also sort of captures it.
Thank you, Chair Geisinger. Committee Vice Chair Sloan.
Right, I would agree with all these comments, and I think a simple deletion of the tight labor market would do the job.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sloan. Yeah, I completely agree. Words really matter, and adjectives sometimes, they get thrown around, but they're very meaningful in a document like this. And the two words that jump out to me are extremely challenging and highly specialized. So we say the board further acknowledges that competition to attract a GM CEO with the required suite of competencies, knowledge, and experience is extremely challenging given the highly specialized transit environment. So I think we've very well captured the difficulty of the position and how hard it is to find someone as competent as our current general manager Johnson is. Additionally, Ms. Pelleggi, thank you for highlighting that we have the adapt nimbly to changing external and internal circumstances, which I think also give us the ability to make those industry specific, given some of the other bullets. But as was pointed out, the tight labor market, given that no adjective and not being bounded, generally has a broader macroeconomic reference. So I think a simple deletion would make for a good amendment, and it's sounding like that would be fairly supported. Any further discussion on that item, or then having not seen a whole lot on that, any other additional items on the compensation philosophy? Okay, so to summarize, we just had a discussion around some potential changes. Thank you, Director Guzman, please.
I apologize. I couldn't find the hand up button.
No
quickly.
problem.
I have a question, and it's just more clarification. We are a public agency, but we reference public and private sectors, which I know goes back to the Gallagher statement. I just want to understand why we are including that in terms of doing this work, this philosophy, and how that is related to running a public agency if we're looking at private compensation, because the funding sources are different. I'm just seeking clarification on that, and I would love to get everybody's opinion on that. I don't feel one way or the other to it. I just am curious because it makes a difference. Like you're saying with words, we're talking about a public institution, not a private business. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Guzman. I think it's an excellent question. I think there'll be some good discussion here. And I saw Ms. Johnson, your hand went up right away. I'm thinking you have some comments on this, so please go ahead.
I do. Thank you so much. Thank you, Director Guzman. One thing that's really important to take into consideration when you're looking at the market holistically, I'll use a clear-cut example that I'm sure everyone's familiar with. RTD contracts out 50% of its transit services currently. So why wouldn't someone be looking at the compensation for somebody who's doing a job very analogous to mine on the private sector side, more specifically? Then you have the engineering realm where you have individuals that oftentimes, I worked at the beginning of my career, in a engineering and architectural firm, and working in conjunction with public sector clients as you partnership. So that's the breadth of experience relative. It's not necessarily when you look at a global engineering and architectural firm where you're looking at the CEO, the titles are different. You could be looking at somebody who is the transit leader for North America, for instance, which would be analogous to a position of running a transit agency per se. So that's why it's germane. But I just wanted to offer that up because oftentimes the joke is that's the general manager CEO graveyard when people leave the public sector and then people go to that side and come back. I say that in jest, but just wanted to, well, not really, it is. But anyway, I wanted to offer that up just from my perspective, but I will yield to our Chief People Officer to further clarify. But I wanted you to know that that is a common practice with people that have positions such as mine that may go to the private sector, then come back to the public and, and split between the two. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for weighing in on that. You mentioned Chief People Officer Pelleggi. So Director Catlin, I see your hand, but I'll open up to Ms. Pelleggi to see if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Sure. First off, great question. I think, so number one, it's wherever you may be looking for talent. And so that's really the key, like where could the talent lie? And certainly it's likely going to be in another transit agency, but as GM Johnson said, it could be in another transit organization that is private. And we don't know what's going to happen across year over year, what's going to happen with different agencies, how they're built. So it does give the flexibility, but it's really where you find your talent. But I also want to just add, it doesn't mean though that when the board commissioned Gallagher for the Gallagher report or a future report, I was given an example of the compensation for the CEO of HP, how would that be relevant to the GM and CEO position at RTD? It's not. And in this instance, because it's private doesn't mean that it gets pooled in. It's not a comparator. It would be a comparable private or public agency if you were setting compensation. And why I say that is, HP, I think, has 60,000 employees. They have a $3.31 billion budget. It's not in the same realm. So we would never be looking, nor would we expect to find a CEO from HP who would be willing to come to RTD. But we don't want to exclude the potential for comparable private or public organizations where you might find the talent. You need to still be competitive.
Thank you, Ms. Pileggi, for weighing in on that. Very helpful points there, and Ms. Johnson as well. Director Catlin, please.
Thank you, Ms. Pileggi. And actually, that was going to be my point. That's well stated. You're looking for talent. We're looking at C-suite executives for the most part. And the other thing I would like to point out is that it's not an apples to apples comparison typically with compensation, but when you look at the overall compensation philosophy that includes benefits and the other things more than just salary, then maybe you can have a pretty good way to put together a package that could attract high-level talent. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Director Catlin. Not seeing other hands at the moment, I'd like to offer one thing, Director Guzman. I think it's a great question. One thing that keeps me up at night when I think about leaders of an organization is this is a really high stress environment right now with transit. I think we all know that, hearing from the general manager, certainly don't live it the way she does. Also, any industry report we read in transit, it's very clear this is a high stress environment, and that makes burnout very real. And one thing that happens in burnout, there's all these large consulting firms that make a habit of taking on CEOs that are looking to maybe not have the operational teams, at least for a period of time, and have very high billable rates as industry experts to a variety of organizations. So I'm not trying to open any ideas or suggestions, but when the market gets tough, it definitely is on my mind. So just offering that from some of my industry experience, that consulting firms is another thing that I think we may need to keep an eye on as the environment remains stressful. Director Arusha, I see your hand up, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that in the red line document, in the first bullet, it's not in red, but it does say related public and private sectors. And I wasn't sure if Director Guzman was referring to that version or the original version, simply because the red line version doesn't have the word related in red, although that is, I think it was supposed to be in red. And to that end, I guess I just wanted to note that, or offer, I should say, I think we all agree that the market for a transit CEO is highly specialized and maybe a bit smaller. And so I could certainly see the perspective that if we weren't very clear in that first bullet what related means, it could be construed to mean that we are referencing non-related markets. So I heard different feedback on that from my colleagues, and I'm actually a little bit confused where the committee stands. Are we talking about a compensation philosophy that's very generalized to C-suite executives? Will a future RTD board, pull completely from the private sector for an unrelated, from an unrelated sector? Or are we still focused on the transit sector? Is that where our compensation philosophy lies? So I hope I didn't throw us off, but just as an outsider or observing this committee, I'm actually a bit confused as to where we've landed.
Thank you, Director Arusha. Director Guzman, please go ahead. Seems like you might have a reaction. You are on mute.
I thought I unmuted myself. The public and private sectors appears in two places. So it makes sense to me in the second paragraph where it talks about North American scale in both public and private sectors when considering talent acquisition and retention. Got that part. Thank you. It's the first bullet point. I guess I should have been more clear. But it is that word related. And as you said, apples to oranges. And I understand generally what we're talking about. I just want to make sure that we're not going to get slapped back by the public for comparing private compensation. I guess as long as it's comparable and related to transit, then that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to make sure that that's what we're saying and everybody reads it the same way, because we have to defend our policy once we make a decision to move this forward. Or if we pass this as a board, then the board is held to that account. And so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly what we're talking about here. So thank you for the information, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Pelegi, and Director Catlin. I appreciate you weighing in on that one too, because I have never been a CEO and I don't know what that feels like. So I appreciate the knowledge share.
Thank you, Director Guzman. Thank you, Director Arusha. I do think that word related is a key part of that, that first bullet that helps guide us. And Ms. Pelegi, please go ahead.
Sure. So that call out on that specific bullet is purely around determining compensation. And so it really is saying here, when you're thinking now, you got to put on, I'm going to put on the HR hat. When Gallagher went out, when the board comes to Gallagher or a future agency and says, we'd like you to do a market comparison for our GM and CEO role. This bullet here that's going to say, that says we want to be 50th percentile to comparable public transit agencies and related public and private sectors where executive talent may reside. That then is for the board at that time to be giving the direction to that, we'll use Gallagher, to say, here's what makes a comparable agency. And it might change as the market changes, but it's going to look at the size of the agency. What's their annual budget? This is the comp side. What's the annual budget? How many employees do they have? What type of regulated environments do they work in? So now you're looking, that's the questions that would come from Gallagher to this board to say, who do you want us to compare you to? Who do you want to be competitive with? And here's how you're going to set your 50th percentile. That would be a discussion. So this is very specific compensation language that you would need, the board would provide. And then even in that process, Gallagher would come back and would show you, here's who we've grabbed, who we think might be comparable. It still gives the board the opportunity to whoever is working on leading that engagement, if it was the performance committee, if they included something that you could say, no, we're not going to consider that for our 50 percentile benchmarking because we don't consider them to be comparable. And here's why, whatever those reasons would be. So the first one, they are two separate statements. This one is very specific to how you would determine your 50th percentile.
Thank you, Ms. Pelegi. Thank you, Director Guzman, for the question. Again, helpful clarity. I'm a little concerned about our timeline. I would like for us to get to that discussion item. I'm going to go ahead and just suggest that we summarize where we are here. Thank you for the discussion. And we need to consider a few amendments, I believe. Some of the things that we have discussed is what would look like an amendment for on the second paragraph, changing V to N. We had a discussion around, I'm just going not in order of our discussion, but order of the document. We had a discussion around striking and tight labor market from the second paragraph. We did have a discussion around the final bullet, that be reviewed for market competitiveness and legislative regulatory compliance on an annual basis, and whether or not that should remain. We did have a discussion around whether to maintain the timeline, the explicit timeline of 18 months. We did have some discussion around the clarity on public and private sectors, but understood that Director Guzman, you were asking a question of clarity on that one. So with all of that in mind, Let's do this with amendments. Let's do this quickly and let's be organized with it. I would like to go one at a time so that we don't get embedded here. And I think we can do this quickly and move on to our discussion item. Before we move on to that, I know we're working on a procedural process here. Mr. Kroll, do you have any further comments?
I was just going to offer that I could share my screen, and I've got the 2 changes here reflected in a red line version that I think have garnered support. So if that would be helpful, I can do that.
Please go ahead and do that. And actually, as you're saying that, it's probably a good idea for efficiency's sake, since there seemed to be strong support for both of the changes to the second paragraph. Let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, thank you for sharing that. We can see the screen. There are the 2 red line changes to the second paragraph of and then striking and tight labor market. We do need an amendment for this in a second. I know Director Sloan and I believe Director Ruscia, you had comments around the tight labor market, but let me just go ahead and open the floor. Is there an amendment to be made? Director Sloan, please.
Yes, and thank you, Jack, for helping us out here. So I would like to incorporate 2 changes in one amendment, if that is acceptable. And that is in the second paragraph of the compensation policy, that the word "the" be deleted and substituted with the word "and" in the first sentence, and in the next sentence, the words "and tight labor market" be struck from the document.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that amendment?
I'll second.
That's a second from Director Geisinger. Having heard some strong support on this, are there any no votes? So if everyone could raise or lower their hands, are there any no votes to the amendment as shown on the screen, which replaces the word "the" with "and" in the first sentence of the first paragraph and deletes a tight labor market from the second paragraph? Any no votes? Okay, seeing and hearing none, the amendment will move forward with 5 yes and 1 absent from the committee. I thank you to everybody for that. Now we are back to the main motion. We are discussing the compensation philosophy as amended. Are there further amendments to be made? Director Ruscia raised points at the end of the document, that final bullet, as well as the 18 months. However, and thank you, Director Ruscia, for coming and sharing that. I would be looking for a committee member at this time to make any further amendments, if there are to be any to the document. Any other amendments? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for helping us with this. Thank you for sharing the screen. Thanks for taking that down there. Mr. Kroll, great, hands up. I was just about to ask. Great, thank you to everybody for helping with this. I think we are in a really excellent spot, and just again, a massive thank you to Ms. Pileggi and Mr. Kroll for the help in moving this forward. And thank you to everybody, especially General Manager Johnson, for the patience in the process here. With that, on the main motion as amended, are there any no votes on adopting the compensation philosophy for the General Manager and CEO? Seeing none, the motion will pass with 5 yes votes and 1 absent. Thank you very much, everybody. Very much appreciated. Okay, at this time, we have no further recommended actions, but we do have a very important discussion item. This is with regards to the General Manager and CEO performance appraisal process and timeline. I will be presenting this item, but would also invite Ms. Pileggi and Mr. Kroll to provide some input. Ms. Pileggi being the subject matter expert who has helped to synthesize a lot of what is here. Thank you for working with the big, large, messy document with MIDI embedded comments now to help summarize this into the form that we have in the PowerPoint. And Mr. Kroll, thank you as always for helping us gather all of the feedback from directors. So I'd like to, forgive me here, I'm looking around my screen. I'm going to provide a little bit of additional context to some in this timeline. I'm going to go ahead and ask would either Mr. Kroll or Ms. Pelegi be able to screen share the slides that then I could speak to? Thank you, Mr. Kroll.
I can do so.
So we'll share those. And just as a backdrop, while that's coming up on the screen, what we need to do here, as we discussed last time that we met, is frame up a 2023 process and a 2024 process and beyond, for that matter, for performance evaluation of the CEO and general manager. When we started this discussion at the beginning of the year, we had identified that this was very important for us to improve and that there were opportunities to improve the process. We did have a discussion. It's actually two different discussions on this to gather feedback. I have had the opportunity to now work directly with Ms. Pelegi, as well as then from a procedural standpoint with Mr. Kroll, after several important meetings directly with the general manager and CEO about what is important to her as well. And I have done my best with that team to compile together a process. And Ms. Johnson and I went as far as working on some dates that now we are working on with Mr. Kroll in the board office, to which we will need to make some adjustments. On each of these two slides, I'd like to just touch on what we're doing in each phase, discuss where we have to get some input here today, and then set, basically we're looking for somewhat of a head nod on the process, and then we can proceed forward with the work to frame all of this up. So with 2023, things that we need to accomplish in October from a very high level, and we have some draft dates here. Again, I think there's some flexibility in these dates at this time. We need to make sure that all committee members are available, and we also need to make sure that we're well aligning with the availability of all documents. In October, the proposal for how we proceed here is not too dissimilar to last year. There are some changes, however. In October, the Performance Committee will receive the results of the Employee Ownership Survey, as well as the Community Value Survey, and the Customer Survey. This would then be provided to the Performance Committee, and the directors will receive those strategic priority outcomes for 2023. And they will also receive an assessment form. I'll talk about that more in the November time frame, but we would receive a general manager and CEO performance assessment form that we will use for our assessments of the general manager. In November, the CEO and general manager, as she did last year, will submit to the Performance Committee her self-assessment to the committee. Following the receipt of that assessment, all directors on the board of directors will be invited to complete, not yet for the written record or to turn in, but for their own purposes to guide discussion, to complete the general manager and CEO performance assessment form that they received from the board office. This assessment form will contain, and I would suggest, and this is an area we need to have some discussion around what this should look like. My recommendation would be that it has three major components to it. One is with regards to the objective criteria. Did we meet the success outcomes? I would recommend that we make this more of a binary yes or no rather than the sliding scale we had last year. And I would recommend that we have one field for comments on how that came out. That should be a relatively easy section. It will be very objective. The second section would then be on the organizational values. This is the subjective criteria. This is where we weigh in on the general manager's whether she has exhibited passion, respect, diversity, trustworthiness, collaboration, and ownership. Those are our organizational values as adopted in our strategic plan. What we would do, my recommendation would be, we move these again to a binary that either she successfully exhibited or did not exhibit each of those organizational values. This will be much easier in 2024, which we'll talk about, but we can then provide for each of those at least 2 written concrete examples of where we have observed the general manager and CEO exhibiting or not exhibiting each of those organizational values. The final section of the evaluation form would give us an open area for additional comments, if relevant, to share with the general manager and CEO. All board members would complete a draft of that assessment form, having had been delivered the CEO's self-assessment, as well as the success outcome results that will have been provided to us. Immediately following that, on November 14th is the proposed date here. Again, I think there's flexibility in these dates. We would have an executive session at which the general manager and CEO would have an opportunity to directly present her self-assessment to the committee and to all attending board members at that executive session, and present her self-assessment. Following that, each board member would then have the opportunity to verbally and directly in that meeting provide the results of their self-assessment form to the general manager. This would be going through the objective criteria, yes, I agree or disagree that it was met or not met, and then going into that subjective criteria of here's what we have to share, and then any additional comments to the general manager, which, by the way, might help guide the goal setting for next year of here's things that I'd like to dialogue about with the agency that we think could be better or are going very well. We'd have a 2-way dialogue, the general manager with board members. I think that would help eliminate all the anonymity and lack of clarity that we had last year. We'd have a very open discussion as to how this relates to the contract and seek alignment on where we all stand with the CEO and general manager's performance. Then moving into phase 4 of final calibration, what would then happen is 3 days or very quickly after the executive session would be held, board members would have the opportunity to revise and edit their forms. The forms should be done coming into the executive session. But if the general manager, for example, is not understanding or a comment that was made, if, for example, I made something that was very unclear and Ms. Johnson were asking a number of questions of me, it would be clear to me I had given difficult to interpret feedback. I could then clarify that, improve that for the sake of the record. Then all board members would hand in their forms, their assessment forms, and the board office would work together with myself as chair of the committee to assemble a final report. That final report would include the narrative of our findings on the general manager performance. It would include any recommended compensation increase that is a result as per the contract that we currently have. It would have the CEO and general manager self-evaluation or self-assessment form, and it would also contain the performance evaluation forms from all directors. That report would be synthesized and developed to then be brought forward to this committee, which gets into phase 5, where the performance committee would meet in executive session to review the report, and then we can ultimately move that forward to the board. This is the recommended process for 2023. I think the challenge we have, as we've already stated from the beginning, is we have objective criteria that we have not felt has well served the CEO in evaluating her performance, which I believe we need to address in 2024, which is captured on the next slide. However, I think that the main problem that had been highlighted from last year was the lack of clarity in the delivery, the anonymity, and lack of direct communication. So I think we can address that this year and help create the framework for the following year. I'm going to move to the next year and cruise through that. I know we're moving very quickly, but then we can have a discussion about all of this and come up with how we'll garner feedback before we move this forward. In 2024, there's a major change, really 2 major changes. I think one is that in 2023, and you'll see in November 2023 in phase 1, we do annual goal setting. I think we absolutely must revisit our annual goals and ensure that while we will align with our net promoter score metrics that we have been using, that we will come up with near-term, measurable, very specific goals aligned with the CEO that we will be able to dialogue about throughout the year next year and use as our objective criteria. This will also make our subjective criteria better because, as I mentioned in 2023, instead of coming up with miscellaneous examples, we can say, great, here's a concrete example of how trustworthiness was exhibited or not exhibited in the accomplishment or non accomplishment of a particular goal. So if we missed a goal, was it still done with our organizational values? If we achieved a goal, was it done with our organizational values? The example that's always been given to me in performance evaluations is you can set a goal of, I want to lose weight. Well, if you do that with smoking, sure, you accomplished, you lost weight, that's great, but maybe that wasn't the healthiest decision in the intent. If you do it with diet and exercise, you've done it with intent. Those would be the, did we accomplish it and what were our goals? So we would work together in 2023 to be very well aligned around those goals. Then in 2024, we would maintain ongoing dialogues on at least a quarterly basis. We will have performance committee executive sessions to discuss with the general manager progress against our annual goals. Additionally, on a monthly basis, the executive committee will have the opportunity to maintain a continual dialogue with the general manager and CEO about achievement of goals and how things are moving to open up more frequent dialogue. That goal setting is one major change, and that frequent check-in on their goals is also a major change. The second major change is the addition of a 360 review. And this would be to help improve the performance review process itself. So starting in October into November, we would begin the assessment of the CEO and general manager, go through a customized 360 review process that would involve many stakeholders being able to provide feedback. Ideas submitted to me by the general manager and CEO were awesome about external stakeholders. DRCOG and other entities may be a great place for us to get feedback that help us improve the performance evaluation of the CEO and general manager. Then everything else will be very similar. We would receive the 360 review. We would receive the attainment, non-attainment of objective criteria. We would receive assessment forms and participate in 360 review, have the opportunity to weigh all of these things together in a more high quality form than we'll have in 2023. And then again, would have an executive session to review all of this with the general manager in a very direct way. And then in phase 5, we would adopt a report that would include the self-assessment form of the CEO, the forms of directors and that feedback, the narrative, the compensation increase, as well as then in that case, the 360 review. So I know we said a lot, but 2023, similar to last year, but adding more direct feedback. And I would recommend changing the form to better capture what we'd like to. And then 2024, we introduce 360 review and we go in with a stronger set of goals. We all feel better about being an annual assessment. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation. Thank you very much. CEO and General Manager Johnson, we've had the chance to speak about this. I know there's been some moving things in here, so I'd like to call on you first. And I thank you for your collaboration in working on this. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to offer some clarification as it relates to a customized 360 review. I don't know how many people that are assembled in this venue right now are familiar with this or ever been a part or had one performed as it related to their overarching performance, but wanted to offer up some clarity. When we talk about it being customized, that would be relative to what the goals are specifically. So when you use the example, Mr. Chair, DRCOG, more or less, it would probably be specifically the executive director of DRCOG, because that's whom I engage with. And so if in fact we were having a specific goal, let's use hypothetically zero fare for youth. There are certain, say there was a goal that was SMART in the sense of being specific, measurable, attainable, realistic and time bound. And it was stated that it would be the goal of the CEO to deliver the program and ensure it was implemented permanently by January 1st of 2025. With that as a backdrop, recognizing that there needs to be identifiable funding source and things of the like, we might ask the question of people within a specific school district that could opine on how I engage, how I work with them. I don't know if the FTA would be amenable to doing this, but potentially, you know, the FTA relative to us getting a waiver so we could garner feedback. So I just wanted to provide some parameters so it's not as if we would just be picking people arbitrarily out of an organization. It needs to be specific and direct, someone whom I coordinate with, because with the 360 review, it could be peers and subordinates. And quite naturally, I think it would be advisable that there would be people on my leadership team or those that report directly to me. One, for instance, like government relations, for instance, while it's not qualified as a member of the leadership team set position, but that is a position that an individual occupies that works in tandem with me quite naturally as we look at legislative programs and things of the like. So I just wanted to provide that clarification. And then another point, recognizing that contractually it states that my goal setting needs to occur on November 1st, that I submit something to you all. We did talk about that the discussion that happens in 2023 could inform said goals. I could present something to you, but then that wouldn't be approved and that could be modified because that would be taken to you for your consideration in a formalized fashion. So I want to provide clarity around that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Very much appreciated. And yeah, thank you for that clarity around the goal setting. I think another great thing about having an executive session to directly deliver feedback is we can have dialogue around how our assessment informs our goals and better understand what's pressing. And then also, again, your point about the customized 360 review. Thank you for the clarity and dialing in on that. All the more reason that getting goals that we're all very aligned around, it will be very helpful since that will guide that assessment. So thank you very much. Forgive me, Director Catlin, I'm going to jump to Board Chair Geisinger. She's communicated a time frame constraint to me here. So I just would like to call on you, Director Geisinger, before you need to depart.
Great. Thanks so much. And I've had some of this conversation with both Chair Davidson and separately with Mr. Kroll. And I think this is really great. I appreciate all the work y'all have done and Ms. Pileggi has done in advising. I think it's important. I know we're not approving this, but I think there are pieces that are missing and pieces that we haven't approved. So it's important to recognize this as a timeline, but not comprehensive. For instance, we don't talk about when we're going to have a discussion of compensation for this year. And certainly that needs to be part of it. You know, the committee and potentially the board have not approved the 360. I think it's a good idea. But you know, approving that and what it looks like is, I don't think is part of, you know, just looking at this timeline. I appreciate the changes you're talking about with the assessment, and I appreciate the fact that this year we're really tied into what we did last year in terms of the values. I've been clear with everyone that I did not like that process. I think we're moving better, but I think moving to real concrete goals for next year really makes a huge difference in giving feedback along the way. And the other thing that I think is missing here that we need to discuss is the surveys. Do we continue with those? What is their role? All of those things. So with that, I appreciate all the work that's been done, and I think there's some great changes here. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. And before you have to depart,
I apologize. I do have to leave in 5 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. I know, and we're coming to the, top of the scheduled time. So thank you. And just to react before you have the hard step, I thank you for all of that. I do think that important point about where we discuss the compensation increase, which will need to happen after we've garnered all that feedback and set that to bring to the board for the December approval in 2023. I do think we need to spend some time on that. I also did just want to say that if we have a general head nod and the performance committee is feeling good about this direction, we can do some breakout work. I know, for example, Director Sloan, you have some thoughts around assessment form. One of the things we need to do is create the assessment form. And another thing that we need to do that Director Geisinger, you had touched on, is that 360 review. What we could do is frame up a high-level scope that would be used to guide what an outside firm might be able to do for us. So if everyone's feeling generally comfortable, each of these will need their own, we need to drill into them and complete what needs to be completed. And I'm happy to take the lead on that with each director that would like to help, as well as the members of staff that will assist. Thank you, Director Geisinger. I'll continue the discussion, although I did just see, Ms. Johnson, your hand went up. Any item of clarity that you were seeking or wanted to provide?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Chair Geisinger's remarks, and I would be remiss not to state this, recognizing within the tenets of my employment contract that we both agree to what the performance the performance appraisal process entails. So I just wanted to ensure, because in the conversation I heard everyone's name mentioned but mine, and recognize that this is guarding my performance. I want to state clearly for the record that conversations need to ensue with me. As I stated before, I am not inclined to use the intermediary. So when we're discussing about scoping out what something may look like for a consultant, I think first there needs to be determining factors that are made with me as the incumbent relative to my performance. And then that information is shared with the board by the appropriate designated individuals that will be guiding this process. So there's no confusion about what it is we agree to relative to my performance as I am the general manager and CEO. So thank you very much for the opportunity to express that.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Johnson, and my apologies for not explicitly stating that. I would like to very much continue the one-on-one dialogues that we've had about all of these processes and revisiting that. So certainly, as myself as the chair of this committee and you as the general manager would like to continue that as for each of the items, that we made sure that we are 100% aligned before moving forward with those, since this is about our assessment and your performance review. So thank you for that additional clarity. Director Catlin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this timeline is an excellent start and very thorough. I agree with Chair Geisinger that we do need to add a few things to the timeline. I have, since I've been on this board for 5 years, I have long advocated for a 360 review for the GM CEO. And I'm really pleased to see that this concept is being entertained. Having experienced 360 reviews in my career, I think it's really, really important to get those perspectives. And Ms. Johnson, you clarified some of the questions I had, and I think a really thorough engagement with external stakeholders and the agency itself is really important. So thank you for moving that forward. And I will, if this comes to the committee and ultimately the board for approval, I will be a hearty supporter of that addition to this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Catlin. Appreciate that. Committee Vice Chair Sloan, please.
Yes, thank you. This is an amazing document, and I really appreciate all the work that went into clarifying the timeline. It relieves my anxiety greatly, about accomplishing both this year's evaluation and next year's assessment. And as you've noted, now that something is so clear, it's now very open to change, addition, modification. So going forward, if we have concerns about that, how do you want to address those? Do you want individual board member or committee members to send emails, and you and the board office can collect the proposed changes, additions, modifications? So because now that it is, so apparent, excuse me, about what we have to do, these changes also rise to the fore. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Sloan. Great question, great input on this. Yeah, by having something like this, we can react to it. Absolutely. What I would, suggest is that any directors, committee members or not, submit feedback to the board office with myself on copy. Director Sloan, I think we can, we'll be mindful of how we communicate everything. But I'd like to look at how we combine some of this feedback for the sake of the committee moving into next year. So let's lean on the board office to collect all of these. Everyone can copy me on that. Much of this doesn't have to be approved or brought forward as a recommended action. Some of it does, like moving forward with a 360 review. And I'll also say that as we consider 2024, with the passing of the compensation philosophy, we now need to react to the Gallagher through that lens with the base salary. Also, if 18 months is our guideline, it's almost upon us. So as we consider 2024, we're going to need to weave in our discussions around base salary adoption and engagement with General Manager and CEO Johnson about her contract. So with respect to that, as well as what's already documented here, please submit any feedback to the board office, copy me, we'll pull them together. And those of us that need to dialogue and breakouts can do so to move each item forward and accomplish these goals. Thank you. Director Ruscia, again, thank you for participating in the committee here. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I'll be brief. I just wanted to offer a thought for the committee's consideration in looking at the timeline and understanding that we also have a board of 15 and we will have new board members coming elected next November for inauguration in January 2025. I just wanted to flag that new board member piece because a solid board and a good manager is going to be thinking about performance and feedback and support the whole year, that whole period of time that you're evaluating a person, and not just the few weeks or month before it happens. So I would just encourage this committee to think about how we'll onboard our new board members so that they can be effective in this new process, because they won't have the history that this current board has or will have. And the other thing I just wanted to say, and this is again completely up to this committee or you, Chair Davidson, is that it might help when you send an email to the whole board for some feedback or thoughts to maybe put in a couple of guiding questions. I think I heard, I don't want to misinterpret, but I think I heard that there were still some outstanding questions that this committee will work on. And so maybe just getting a preliminary thoughts that are more specific to the questions that have been posed will help this committee kind of anticipate the whole board's needs without making, putting 15 cooks in the kitchen. So just wanted to offer those thoughts, but and thank you also for letting me speak. I know I'm not part of this committee. I've been following it, and I just really appreciate everyone's work. So thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Director Ruscia. Great point about the onboarding, especially given that this is such an important part of the an overarching goal of the of this board. And I think one thing that we need to do, and in many ways, I've brought this analogy up before, but it does remind me of the work we had to do on our audit committee. We need to create processes, cadences, and consistency where there currently are none. And by doing so, then there's an opportunity to also train on that and onboard on that. And I think that's a really important thing to be mindful of. And thank you for raising that. I know we're having discussions around onboarding in the future. And absolutely, I think this goes on the list, given all the reasons you stated. Thank you. Director Guzman, please.
So I guess my question is more for Deborah. Are you feeling confident with where we are at right now? Because I know that that was a concern that was brought up before, relative to watching last year's performance review, reading through materials. I want to make sure that you are feeling comfortable as our employee and somebody that we work with closely. That's one question. The second question is, and I really want to be clear about this process and make sure that I didn't misunderstand what you said, Chair, that the expectation going into this is clear, that we will be putting our names with our comments, and that is not going to be anonymous. I don't want any confusion around that, because I will not do mine anonymously. Deborah's going to know what I say and that I said it. And I want to make sure that that's clearly understood by all directors prior to we engaging in a process of review, so that there's no confusion with what occurred last year, and that this is a new year and we're all here to do that work. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Guzman. I'll turn to Ms. Johnson first.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Director Guzman, for the question. You all know I'm a straight shooter. I don't have a high level of confidence that we're going to be able to align around what's proposed here, just by the tenor of the discussion that's ensued relative to the dates and how we need to move 15 individuals along relative to what it is that we have before us. I know there were comments made about the dates that we have as well. I think this is just something that's problematic with the structure of our organization relative to timelines, how we utilize a calendar year as a fiscal year, because inevitably there's always some conflicts in reference to scheduling and things of the like. So I want to be clear that I'm not saying that the board members aren't committed, but relative to getting everybody assembled in this time frame will be immensely difficult regarding where we are currently. Also, with the alignment around where we are with specific goal development going forward, I just think there's a lot of competing priorities relative to budget development and things along those lines. My request is to have in-person executive session so we can have conversations, so people can be in the moment and be in a space where we can have dialogue. So there's nothing left to interpretation when we're on the screen, and one may misconstrue body language or tonality because folks could be engaged in something else and not be fully engaged in the discussion in which we're having. So that's where I am currently. And as we talked about getting comments back and forth, I know that's going to take some time. So I really am not optimistic that we're going to be able to do things as the chair and I have discussed. So thank you, and just wanted to stand in my truth. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you for your honesty. And I know it's a difficult conversation to have. That's why I'm asking, because I think it's really important to know the amount of pressure or work that we have to do as directors and what we can expect of ourselves and from others as well. And so, as I said, I fought to get on this committee, and I want to make sure that we do all of the work that we can for you the way that we are supposed to, and in alignment with one another. So thank you for that opportunity to weigh in and to speak with us about it with candor.
Thank you, Director Guzman, and thank you, Ms. Johnson, for the candor. I'd like to react to that, and then Dr. Guzman will react to the second point that you asked about, just clarifying the anonymity. So first of all, Ms. Johnson, thank you for the direct feedback. I think we have no choice but to move the 15 board members along. I'd like people to submit comments at will, but we do need to move forward with the work product. There's two things I'd like to turn to the board office on, Mr. Kroll, which is number one, getting a firm schedule of calendars in place. There are a few key dates that we're going to need to make sure we have near full participation, at least from the performance committee on, especially thinking of things like the executive session that we're delivering the performance evaluation. But ultimately, given the time frame of the year, and totally agree, Ms. Johnson, on the difficulties of a calendar year, fiscal year, just given the reality, there will be meetings that not everyone will be able to make, and that's going to have to be okay. But we need to make sure to have a quorum And if directors as part of the full board miss out on the opportunity to provide feedback, in my view, that is not as bad as not delivering the feedback at all. So we'll need to move that forward. And Ms. Johnson, you have my commitment to move this forward as expeditiously as possible. And Mr. Quill, we need to work together on those dates. Second, we'll need the board office's help to work on the work product that's going to be required for all of this, the assessment form. Also, if we are going to do a customized 360 review next year, which I'm hearing general consensus on, we need to work on at least a straw man of what a scope might look like so this committee can move that forward for next year. Ms. Johnson, your comments are on goal setting, heard loud and clear. Mr. Kroll, if you wouldn't mind taking a note that we should consider an executive session prior to the delivery of the delivery of the performance evaluation, given that that's in mid-November rather than when goals would be set in early November. There may be an opportunity to do that if we work with Chair Geisinger at an executive committee in October, whereby we could, make sure it's well communicated to the performance committee and to everybody that we would be seeking full participation. That may be productive. Let's make that suggestion. I know we're a little tight on time, and I do want to react to Director Guzman, your point about anonymity. Yes, absolutely. The full intent, as you stated, and thank you for firmly stating it and clearly stating it, is that this will not be anonymous. With having an in-person evaluation, which I view to be the most high quality, and I think Vice Chair Sloan for really pushing that early this year that we need to move to that type of structure. It provides an opportunity to give that direct feedback. And not everything that you provide in a verbal session and discuss in a session may necessarily be in your written document that goes into the record, or all of it may be. That will be up to the nature of each director. So yes, absolutely, direct feedback. So thank you for that. Again, apologies that we've gone over on this meeting. I really do try to keep these things within the time frame, but this is such an important topic here that I thank everybody for the dialogue. Director Guzman, you raised two very important, very critical issues. Is there anything you wanted to react to on that? Okay, thank you very much for that. Director Catlin, please.
Just in light of the fact that we have gone over on this meeting, which I think the dialogue was good. I just want to make sure that we plan for those executive sessions and those other meetings as we go forward, that we plan enough time. I know it's kind of an imposition on people's schedules, but as you stated, it's very, very important for us to get this semi-right this year, and then moving forward in 2024, get it nailed down and get it right. So I just think that we need to make sure that we devote ample time. That's my only comment.
Duly noted. Yeah, I don't like going over on meetings, so but these were important items and some took a little longer than expected. So just planning a longer meeting may be the answer here. And along those lines, Mr. Kroll, I know you had reached out to me and we communicated about meeting after this meeting and convening in person to really start to sketch out, what we need to do next and when and how we organize the board in doing so. So if we could do that over the next week, that would be great. I'm happy to come into the office where we can meet and discuss that. We'll touch base about schedules. Other items with respect to the performance assessment process. Great. I've heard some general support for kind of what we're trying to accomplish here and do. Like I said, not much of this requires recommended action. Some of it might. We'll explore that. We'll move that forward. We'll start proceeding. But to Director Sloan's point, any feedback that anyone has and would like to submit, please do that. We'll have to be doing this in flight a little bit to meet our timelines, but please go ahead and send that to the board office with myself on copy. Seeing no other discussion on this, we will move to other matters. Are there any other matters to discuss? I do just want to emphasize as another matter that we did not adopt a base salary yet from the Gallagher compensation analysis. We cannot lose sight of that, but we are approaching the 18-month mark. If this compensation philosophy moves forward, even if it doesn't, we're approaching an 18-month mark with our current general manager and CEO's contract. We are also going to be revisiting goals and success outcomes and how we measure compensation. I think we need to take a holistic, I'll use our general manager's favorite term, which I also love, a holistic approach to compensation when we now view that analysis through the lens of this compensation philosophy. So I want to be very clear that we cannot lose sight of that. Let's get this compensation philosophy moved forward with our colleagues at the board. Please, performance committee members, help me in answering any questions our colleagues might have around this so that we can move forward with reacting to that analysis. That was the other matter I wanted to raise. And Ms. Pelleggi, please go ahead.
I just want to, and I know we're pressed for time, but I just also want to highlight for the committee that the work will need to be done around setting a salary range, because you were not required to post the salary range because legislation came into effect January 1 of 2021. The agency is required to post a salary range and to demonstrate a salary range if you proceed. If you're going out to market, plus also to have the benefits package. So I just wanted to highlight that we do have requirements that you were not required to meet the last time you were recruiting for GM and CEO. I'm not suggesting that you're going to be going out and recruiting, but for that purpose, and then as well as transparency within the compensation philosophy, it's reasonable that a range be posted. And a range being set does not mean a change in compensation. I want to make that really clear that they're two separate things.
Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi. Very helpful clarity. I very much appreciate it. Dr. Guzman, please.
Super quick while we're on this, how do we do that? Like, are three of us getting together? Is this committee creating a document? Is it coming as an action item from the agency? How do we move that forward to the board so we get it done efficiently?
What we can do, Dr. Guzman, great question, is adopt one of the recommended base salary ranges from the Gallagher report. And actually, the way in the very beginning of the process of working on compensation philosophy, Ms. Pelleggi presented us with those tables of where we're aligned, not aligned, and summarizing Gallagher, which I think was a very helpful lens. I think we need to now, once we pass this compensation philosophy, take that look, and we can frame a recommended action to adopt a base salary range. I'd like to take the opportunity to speak directly with Ms. Johnson about her compensation, her total compensation with respect to that analysis. I'd like to be able to dialogue with Ms. Pelleggi about that as well. And then I can certainly frame up something that could become a recommended action as we proceed. Great question. Any other on this or any other matters? All right, and again, I'll just conclude by saying, yeah, please.
Ms. Pelleggi's hand is up.
Thank you.
Oh, no? Oh, okay, that's an inadvertent.
Thank you for pointing that out. I was looking over here. So thank you. And again, I just want to conclude with, thank you, Ms. Johnson, for the direct communication about a lot of this, and please let us continue that. I know schedules are difficult, and especially as we get to this time of year, but I thank you for all the input and direct feedback, and we'll certainly be continuing that. Not seeing any other matters, we will move forward. The next date is to be determined. We have a placeholder out there. We will quickly communicate that out. I will work with Mr. Kroll to work on those set dates. What I would like to do is set all dates through the remainder of the year, set them in stone, put them there, and folks will commit to those. We need to get some gauge of how people will be there. The next meeting that had been scheduled was Monday, October 2nd, followed by Monday, November 6th. I think we're going to need to make a little bit of change those dates. So I'll be in touch about those along with Mr. Kroll. With that, seeing no other discussion, we will adjourn this meeting. Oh, please.
I'm not trying to prolong the meeting, but once again, let's ensure that we coordinate with my schedule. I posted those dates. There's Thanksgiving week and things of the like, because if all the board can make it and I can't, then the meeting's for naught. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We will ensure that necessary staff and necessary committee members are available, especially including yourself, Ms. Johnson. So thank you. With that, seeing no further discussion, we will adjourn this meeting as of 10:20 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Again, thank you very much for everybody for moving over, and Jack will be in touch. Have a great day, everybody.